All right, this week on Hood Politics, it should better be called Los Politicos de Barrio, because we're going to talk about President Bukele in El Salvador. This show, I think, is the perfect example of the premise of the whole concept of hood politics. If you understand the hood, you understand politics. And this particular situation hits so close to home because it's so similar to the experience growing up here in Los Angeles. There's one thing that I remember from my childhood that I never ever connected the dots on until much later. One of those situations is when, we'd hit like 7th or 8th grade when it was recruiting time for the gangs. Some of our friends would be getting in trouble, and they start, kind of hanging with the wrong crowd, right? And they would just come up missing. But not in like a scary way like you thinking. But they would come up missing. We'd be talking and be like, yo, you seen Chris? Like, I ain't seen Chris in a while. It's like, oh, Chris had to go stay with his auntie in Arkansas. He had to go live with his grandma in Atlanta. He's in OKC. He doesn't get in trouble. His mama sent him to live with his auntie out there. And for us, we would be like, dang, that's crazy. Anyway, because we're from LA, right? So we just, at that point, they was just gone, This being a Latino space too, it would be like, oh, he had to go to Mexico, he had to go back with his uncle, it just, whatever the situation was, it was normal for kids to just be gone, right? Whether it was deportations or you was getting in trouble and you got to go live with your family so that you could get out of trouble. Little did we know, I never thought about what happened on the other end of that. They was starting gangs. It used to blow my mind. You drive through Topeka, Kansas, and it'd be a rolling 60s set. And I'm like, have you been to 60th Street? Like, why is this gang named after a California street? Well, you probably was in jail. The guy who started that hood was probably in jail from somebody from the 60s. Or, just like I said, you got sent to go live with your auntie. So you started getting active and you brought the gang life there. Now, let me talk to you about El Salvador. El Salvador, back in the 90s, had a serious situation with violence like everything else did in the 90s. And you had all these feuding gangs, but you also had this situation where people were coming to America to try to make better lives for their families. They got to America, specifically California, right northwest of downtown to this area called MacArthur Park. And they built a community. Little did they know when they got here, all of the streets were already carved out by the Mexicans. The Mexican gangs have already had streets carved out, right? And y'all know among that outside, y'all got y'all own hate among each other. And that started happening. El Salvadorian community banded together. Gangs that used to fight against each other back home now figured, man, we got to stand back to back with each other here to defend ourselves, because it's gente, right? They formed a hood called MS-13 or Matrucha, which I remember. Now, if you black, we can't tell the difference. Black gangs would get the weight from the Latinos, from the Mexicans, because that's where the drugs came from. They came from Central and South America, so we get the weight from them. I can't tell the difference. We know the Cubans and Puerto Ricans, they sound different than the Mexicans, but that's East Coast. That's Miami. We are in Cali. We get it from the Mexicans. El Salvadorians sounded the same to us, but they had a hierarchy. So they became remarkably violent. Then you had Proposition 187. Then you had all these different props that were causing mass deportations. And a lot of these hood kids and their families was deported back to El Salvador. So what did they do? They took Trece with them. And they went down to El Salvador and they got active, fam. Active. They took all they learned in Cali, right? And got super active. To the point to where El Salvador was like, yo, this is it. Here comes the part where we need to understand why geopolitics matters to us. Because how do you clean up the streets? How do you solve this problem? When you from the hood, even if it's not a a super hood, if you just understand what it's like to have your neighborhood controlled by gangs, you understand that the free movement around is not free at all, right? You have to figure out which direction you're going to walk home from school because you're going to get your backpack, your shoes stolen, right? It's going to be a situation. We're held hostage, but we're held hostage by our own people because the dudes running the streets, that's our own cousin, that's our mom, and that's our cousin in them. Like, that's our family doing this, right? So it's complicated. And a lot of times you can't help but be affiliated because, I mean, that's like, there are situations where, you know, you get in trouble with the law and part of your probation is you're not allowed to fraternize, you feel me, with known gang members. But known gang members is like, they're at my auntie house, right? Like, these are my cousins. So you can't help but be involved in the streets in some way, right? How California decided was the gang injunctions. America did the war on drugs, and a lot of us got swept into having, you know, criminal records really just by association. There was a time in California that if you were standing outside and it was more than one of you and you was black or brown, that's a gang, right? So now we're congregating. It became rules. It became the law. El Salvador was figuring, like, how do we solve this problem? We're being terrorized by it. And most people decide you need a strong man. You fight fire with fire. You need somebody that ain't scared of y'all, who's down to sock chuck every fool out there. In comes this young, attractive millennial named Bugele, who's media savvy, who understands marketing, who understands all this. And he like, look, I ain't scared of these little chumps. I'll round them all up. And round them up he did. He had the biggest and, dare I say it, most quote unquote effective crackdown of violence in El Salvador. And how he did it was just like, I ask questions later. I don't ask questions. That's the later question. The later questions, I don't ask questions. You with them. If you with them, I don't even, if you smell like you with them, you getting locked up. He was locking up everybody. Everybody got locked up. I'm cleaning these streets. You know when your mama clean up and the way that she clean up is she just throw away everything. But mom, I need that. It's in the trash. If it's in my way, it's in the trash, right? That's how they was acting. They like, look, if you look like you got a tattoo, you one of them, right? So he cleaned up the streets, right? Air quotes. And it was safe, or was it? I guess the question that is important to us is, how bad do you want these streets cleaned, and at what cost? Because it's people locked up with no due process who really don't have any affiliations, no actual criminal record. They just might be involved. So that type of rule, that type of cleaning up is authoritarian. It's totalitarian. It's all these other type of tarians that we say in America that we believe in not only the rule of law, but in due process, and that you're innocent until proven guilty. But we also say we're a country of law and order. So if you just indiscriminately sweep everything out the streets, when in New York they used to call them the street sweepers, that's what they did. It doesn't matter. Everybody getting swept up, thrown into the paddy wagon. And then you could say, yeah, crime's down. But at what cost? So I think that's the question that needs to be asked. There's a saying in the black community with the old folks basically saying, like, talking out of the side of your neck. What that means is you may not actually know what you're talking about. You're not there. You don't live here. You ain't going through what we going through. You may not know what you're talking about. So I say that to put an asterisk next to any account any of us would have about the governing of El Salvador, because we not there. Now, I was here and I remember the war on drugs was awful, but this isn't El Salvador. And those streets are verifiably cleaner now. There is verifiably less crime happening in El Salvador now. So when Bukele was up for re-election. The question is, were you satisfied? You want to do it again? And the answer was yes. They wanted it again. So this week in Hood Politics on the pod, I want to examine, is the juice worth the squeeze? I don't have an answer to this question, but I think it's something to think about. And as goes the world, so does go home. Do we want an authoritarian? And especially with all the talks about crime and immigration and all the fear-mongering around immigrants, is this the answer we want? I don't know. You tell me. Hood Politics, Eyeball Edition.
Look here, sit down for a little bit.